Well, finally, there's a code of conduct that is going to be governing the conduct of public office holders, the appointees of this current president. It hasn't got the force of law just yet. The previous government had taken the code of conduct bill to Parliament. They didn't quite finish considering it. In fact, if you speak to many, it didn't really get to Parliament House. It was stuck somewhere between Cabinet and Parliament. We'll get some clarity on that very important subject. But this government had decided now to codify one and has launched it. It has no force of law. And so what really is the point of having a code of conduct that hasn't got a legal backing, a legal grounding? Is it too little in the sense that it will not really force anybody to comply because there's no force of law? And that is a fundamental question that many who have criticized this will raise in terms of the lack of the legal backing. So should the government simply take this to the Parliament, considering their numbers there, and have it passed very quickly? Also knowing that the Code of Conduct bill has already been drafted and was in the final stages of now moving or being transmitted from Cabinet to Parliament, shouldn't this government simply continue with the process and have it passed? So any government, whether it is the John Dramani Mahama administration or subsequent ones, will not have a choice to say they will go with this or they will choose and pick what to adhere to. So you have a law that binds everybody so far as you work in the public service. We'll get my guests to weigh in on that. But let's focus for a moment on what we have right now, which was adored yesterday by the president. Some very interesting provisions that the president had put in this particular document. For example, now we know that the ministers under this particular code must declare all conflicts, okay, and avoid any ostentation. And you ask yourself, I mean, how do you even measure the question of ostentation? And then you have no gifts from parties with government interests. Somebody must police that. I mean, you see the chief of staff there very prominently, but you also see the president himself there very prominently also. You also need to declare official gifts above 20,000 cedis. Isn't that too much? Because what I appear to notice, well, what appears to be the norm elsewhere, is that 20,000 cedis, if you convert into dollar terms, that is in excess of $1,000, almost like $1,200. That is too much, is it not? Because the standard is sometimes just $100 or $200, something that is so little, it has no potential of influencing a minister's conduct as a minister, right? As a public officer. But 20,000 cedis, more than $1,000, has that potential, and that clearly may raise a few eyebrows there. We'll get my guests to weigh in on that. And then you look at the public funds for gifts and hampers. I mean, Christmas, we have institutionalized this practice in Ghana where people have created a whole economy around hampers during festive occasions, and it's become a major source of corruption. So the president is looking at that and saying, you cannot use public funds for this. If you want to do it, then you have to use your own funds. But there are exceptions there because you can still get approval from the chief of staff. And we need to look closely at these exceptions. I'll get my guests to weigh in on these exceptions when we sit down for a conversation. Because once you create an exception, then you're creating a loophole there for the ministers and the agencies under this particular government to find a way to wiggle around and maneuver and evade being caught in this particular web. And then all travel requires prior approval by the chief of staff. But you can also travel using public funds for private trips, for example. If it's official, of course, then the state will cover it. But even there, you need to justify to the chief of staff that it is a useful trip, a trip that will benefit the state. It's in the public interest to travel. You cannot travel and go and have fun and go to a very an unimportant trip and still ask the taxpayer to fund it. It's pretty, in essence, what the code is saying. Also, state assets, including vehicles, not for sale. You cannot buy a state asset. And this is coming on the back of the crusade that the NDC waged when they were in opposition, led by Okudeta Blakwa. And we now have this written in the code of conduct for the government. You can't touch it. As far as it's a state asset, you are not allowed to buy one. But also, you can't do influence peddling. It's a major problem here in that part of the world. no solicitations of appearance fee. And I find this very interesting because we know that some of the ministers who are also members of parliament, each time they are workshops, sometimes organized by non-governmental organizations, we all know it's a written code that they demand that they be paid for their time to participate in these very important workshops that they need. Now we've seen that this is written into the code. If you appear and it's a workshop, you cannot ask for money. Even when you're giving without asking, you have to go and declare it. It's part of the things you have to declare to cabinet. Fascinating indeed. I get my civil society friends weighing. Now, do not also interfere in court proceedings is another key thing. I guess that is stating the obvious, and parliamentary duties must be prioritized whilst you also act as a minister. And do not also recommend friends or family for government appointment. The subject of conflict of interest is really at the heart of the code of conduct, and you must declare immediately and step away from anything that has to do with that particular activity that you are superintending as a minister or as a government appointee. So there are a list of penalties here. A public apology is one, and that can be a deterrent, considering a minister who will have to apologize, but that is not enough, clearly. So you can be reprimanded, and then there will be suspension. You can also face the push to resign, and ministers are encouraged to do so under this particular code. If you don't go, you'll be terminated. There's a lot to unpack as far as this code of conduct is concerned. Will this really work, or is it another piece of document that ministers will find a way around it? Because this is a bunch of politicians, and they protect themselves. They put this out to make them look good in the first, 3 months of an administration, 120 days. It was one of those things that they wanted to check the box on. They have done it, so it's now going into implementation. Who is going to police, monitor implementation? Who? We need an independent person, don't we? I'll get my guests to weigh in on this after this. Express always brought to you by Syntax Tanks. It is strong, it is tough. Academic Times newspaper, Pepsi and Cavity toothpaste also. And my guest joining me tonight for a conversation is Shamima Muslim. He's a deputy spokesperson for the government and joins me right now with some insights into the real thinking behind the code of conduct that has been launched by the president. Daniel Yao Demelov, who is a former Auditor General, also joins me. Dr. Kojo Pumpuni Asante is the Director of Policy and Engagements and Partnerships at the CDD, also joins me. And I'm interested to also hear from Hassan Tampuli. He's a Deputy Ranking Member of the Constitutional and Legal Affairs Committee of Parliament. And that committee had a lot to do in the past when it comes to code of conduct drafting, also getting parliamentary consideration, and he was also part of the previous government. I'm curious to learn what they did with that draft bill that was supposed to get parliamentary approval, and what he makes of this current proposal. Not a proposal, actually. It's a code of conduct that has now been approved and it's in force. And I guess the president is the chief implementer of that. I want to bring in Shamima. Shamima isn't with us. I hope she joins us pretty soon so we can get a few key clarifications. One of the key ones, and I want to go there first, and I want to bring in now Dr. Kojo Asante. Now, Doc, one of the key challenges we've had over the years, I guess one of the most consequential issues always is around gifts, because we know that it is one of the most slippery slopes for the appointees. Even the current president was caught in that web when he was giving a gift of a car. We know how that panned out. Our own Manasseh Zuriawoni uncovered that, and it was such a big scandal. So I want to go there first. The provision in this particular code of conduct is a fascinating one because it creates an exception. And I want to go there because it's a lot to unpack, so I want to go straight to the specifics. Under gifts, the code says, to avoid the creation or appearance of an obligation, gifts in cash or kind are not to be solicited or accepted from commercial enterprises or any other organization. However, an exception to this rule is the acceptance of a gift presented during an official visit to an institution. I mean, is this exception acceptable? Dr. Kojo Asante, I was hoping that you could take that for me. If you can unmute for me. Okay, we're having a challenge with him. Hopefully, we can rectify that. But I also have Daniel Demolevu on, and I also have Hassan Tampoli. Let me see if I can get Mr. Demolevu to weigh in on this for me. Mr. Demolevu, can you hear me? Hello, Mr. Demolevu, can you hear me? Okay. What about Hassan and Tampoli? Mr. Tampoli, can you hear me? Please unmute for me, if you can. Okay, clearly we have challenges.
Indeed.
Oh, great that I can begin to hear you. Yes. Stay with me. Let me see if my other panelists have their audio sorted. And Dr. Asante, can you hear me?
Yeah, hello.
Fantastic. And Daniel Demolevu also? Okay. Hopefully, Daniel Demolevu can hear me and also mute his microphone so we can have a conversation on this.
I can hear you loud and clear.
Great, thank you very much. Dr. Asante, I was going to the gifts clause, which creates an exception. Yes, it says you cannot accept a gift, but then creates this exception. That an exception to this rule is acceptance of a gift presented during an official visit to an institution. Is that an acceptable exception?
Yeah, thank you very much, and good evening to your viewers. I think the threshold is very high. 20,000 is a lot of money, and it's really for me a non-starter. See, the issue with the public ethics frameworks across the world is that it's very difficult to police violations of these public ethics issues, but everybody understands it in terms of the preventing corruption. Is that it does create incentives for people abusing their office for private gain. So what you try to do is to create a scenario where the value of the gift, or there's almost like no value to the gift to create any conflict of interest situation, right? So you don't even leave room for anything of value that then puts the public officer in a position where they have to make these decisions about whether they are serving their private interests or not. So 20,000 is too high. I know in the US and things, I think it's $200 or $100.
Yeah, it's the standard is between $100 and $200. In fact, most international organizations I had any dealings with, it is $100.
Yeah. So we have to adapt it, of course, to our own scenario. But certainly, 20,000 is almost over $1,000. That is significant. And the other thing that is obviously not clear is that is this 20,000 for the year? Because I can basically be giving you 20,000 every month, for 12 months, and every time I receive it, it's under 20,000, and therefore it's within the rules. So that there are many problems with the gifts procedure that has been put together. I think they were trying to maybe strike some sort of a balance. But as I said, the objective is not to create value that then create or incentivize a conflict of interest situation, which, as I said, in many occasions is very difficult to monitor and also determine intention of the person that's giving the gift. So you try to just avoid it. Don't create the situation for people at all.
Yeah.
So I think for me that definitely has to be revised. And I want to also comment on the president's accepting gift of the cars, which I think
the two vehicles that
me.
he declared and then presented back into the pool, from what we understand.
Exactly, and I think it's a no-no because you see these are high-value gifts, and nobody. How are you going to determine whether the president gets influence or not in those kinds of scenarios? As much as possible, we want to discourage private individuals, people of any kind of influence, because it's the president we are talking about, and the president has a lot of power to create these kinds of conflict of interest scenarios that you can't really cure, because it's very difficult to establish any benefit one way or the other. So as much as possible, we should just avoid these kinds of value, because we are so used to doing these things. Making this change in behavior, it will be very uncomfortable. But if we are really resetting, we really cannot leave room. There's a lot of best practice across the world, and we just have to look at it very carefully and try to, address, for me, the threshold and the way in which we administer the gift-giving process.
And Doc, stay with me. In fact, my initial question was about the exception. I'll come to that. Once you've talked about the value of the gift, let's stay there. I want to bring in Daniel Demelevo into that conversation. In fact, Mr. Demelevo, in addition to the concerns raised by Dr. Kojo Asante, the code actually says you can actually keep the gift, even if it is more than 20,000 cedis, which if you look at it now, in terms of the exchange rate, you are well in excess of $1,200 there. You can keep the gift. Where the estimated value of the gift is more than 20,000, the minister may retain the gift during office, but must declare it to cabinet in the interest of transparency. So you can keep the gift. So far as you go to cabinet and say, I received a house in Trazaco Valley. It's more than 20,000, yes, of course we know that, but you've declared it in the interest of transparency, yeah, you're fine. You can keep that gift. I mean, first of all, is that the interpretation you also have, and is that acceptable?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. Yes, that's the thinking or the understanding that I have, and I cannot agree more with my brother Kojo. I think we seem to like gift too much. In fact, when you are employed into a public office, you are remunerated. So you are supposed to live with your salary, not gifts. So creating these windows and putting amount of 20,000, I think is a no-no, as my brother has said. I worked at the World Bank. Our threshold was $50, 50, not 100. I don't know whether it has been revised now, but when I was there, any gift above $50, you are not supposed to keep it. You surrender it. You keep only below the $50. So I think it is a no-no. And I must also say quickly that I looked at the document. It is good. There are some areas that add some value. I wished they use those value additions, add them to the code of conduct bill that has been prepared, and then pass it into law, so that it is not something which is going to guide public office holders only during Mahama administration. But there's a small thing I want to draw attention to. If you go to page 30 of the code, they talk about declaration of
assets and liabilities.
Yes. And they talk about jewelries, a minimum of 5 million. It's a lot. And I don't know even if the housing which some of us stay is even up to 5 million. So you have to have jewelry to the tune of 5 million, and there are other things 5 million. I say, ish, this is too high. So, and it is not and it's not consistent with the law, because the 550 does not say anything like that. So I think they may have to review that and maybe make it to align it with the law, and then they should try and pass it into law, so that we don't have one set of ethics or rules or code of conduct during Mahama administration. When Kojo Asante becomes the president, he says, no, I don't respect this. I'm also bringing I don't think we need that.
I mean, let me bring in Hassan Tampuli. You have been an appointee before under the previous president, the Akufo-Addo. What do you make of that threshold, that 20,000 threshold? And I'm just checking to be exact. Currently, the interest rate we are working with, it's $1,400. Mr. Tampuli?
Hello.
Yes, I can hear you, yes.
Yeah, Evans. Okay. Good evening and good evening to your viewers, Mr. Develovo and then Mr. Asante. I think that I agree with Mr. Asante's initial remarks, but I want to take us back to the starting points, which is chapter 24 of the 1992 Constitution, which provides code of conduct for public officers. And I think that various governments have done one thing or the other, trying to give effect to some of the provisions under, Article 284 to Article 288 or so. And I think that this is an effort which, in my view, is not one that is able to deal with the situation that we find ourselves in, except when we are able to enact it into a law. What I see right now is more or less a courtesy for boys and girls. That we're talking about civility, courtesy, and restraint, influence peddling, and so on and so forth. So some of the provisions that I see in there, I'm not too sure they necessarily should come under the code of conduct for public officers per se. There are some things that you don't need to put it down in writing. All right, everyday activities.
Yeah, but I want to talk. I want to talk first about the gift, because you've been a public officer before. 20,000, is it too high? That threshold too high, too little?
The 20,000 cities, I think it should be one that would be in sync with international best practices. All right, because Ghana is not an island, and so we operate within an ecosystem where you interact with other citizens of other nations. And in fact, as ministers or deputy ministers or government appointees, we tend to interact sometimes at the highest level. So if the gifts, the threshold is different from what it is in other jurisdictions, I think that there will be some conflict here and there. So yes, we should be able to align it. International best practice in Europe, in Americas, international organizations, what is the minimum? Then we'll be talking about the fact that, okay, then we need to comply. Unless, of course, we are saying that we are doing 20,000 because we are not too sure about the value of the city in 10 years or in 20 years. So maybe we are hedging. I don't know whether you get the point I'm making.
I do.
Maybe in about 5-10 years, 3,000 cities may come to way less than $1,000. You understand? Unless maybe that is the spirit behind it. Otherwise, 20,000 cities, I agree with Mr. Devlogo and Mr. Santi that yes, we can look at that one to scale it down. 20,000 cities, and there's no even mention of the frequency.
Yeah. So in other words, and that's a very important point. In other words, I can give you 20,000 CDs every month.
As a matter of fact, I can take 18,000 cities every month.
Yes.
All right. Not even every month, every week.
Every week. In fact, every day.
Well, he doesn't talk about the frequency, so it can even be every day.
Yeah.
You understand?
And you don't have to declare.
There must be some specific details as to the frequency, for instance, of how much you should be receiving. All right. Otherwise, this thing is just going to be mere recommendations that the president can keep to himself. And then again, it doesn't have the force of law.
Yeah, I'll come to that. That is such a fundamental point, because your government started something. We didn't quite see the light of it in terms of the legalization, in terms of taking it to Parliament for it to become law. Let me bring in right now the deputy government spokesperson, Shamima Muslim, who joins us now. Shamima, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Can you explain why 20,000 CDs as a threshold for gifts? Gifts that you are allowed to keep and not declare is 20,000 CDs. That currently is $1,400. Why that threshold?
Well, thank you. I've been listening to all the conversations since the launch of the conduct, and now the code, and also the publication of the various provisions. I think it's a good place to start, and the conversations are certainly very welcome. To your question in particular, I think the framers of the code are well aware of what best practice exists in our own local sociocultural context. Just to also correct that in the particular provision regarding gifts, if you read point D, you would see that there's an indication that upon leaving office, the minister must relinquish to cabinet any gift estimated to be worth over 20,000 Ghana cedis unless the minister obtains the express permission of the president to retain it. So it really doesn't end with the threshold of 20,000 and then the arising question of what you do with the gift upon exit. I'm also even curious as a staffer about the frequency argument. Beyond the frequency, we would also need clarity on the sources. So, for example, if I am receiving frequent gifts within the threshold of 20,000 from a particular source, what does that mean?
I mean,
If I'm receiving it from,
Shamima, you are not allowed to be curious. You are only allowed to give us answers because
well,
you are the deputy
we are
spokesperson.
having conversations,
No,
and I'm
no, no,
saying
no,
to you
no,
that
no, no,
even
no,
as
no, not at
staffers,
all. Because we need
let me,
clarity. Or we need clarity
if
on
you
that
can let
subject.
me clarify,
Yeah.
that's the whole point.
Oh,
Remember
you should
that this
allow her
code,
because she's
hold on,
raising
No, I get it.
issues.
I want
yes,
answers. We all do. I mean, she says she's curious.
no,
I'm just saying that I want answers, not to be curious.
Evans,
Yeah.
let's not do that. Remember that I am a staffer who is also supposed to comply. So if I read the code, the staffers and the ministers are not the ones who have prepared the code of conduct. So if we also read the code, we should have the liberty and the right to also seek clarifications. And as you have asked this question, I'm also even also telling you areas that we would also further seek clarifications on. And let it not be like we are on a spree to, deceive the people of Ghana. This is a very good addition to our governance. And I'm explaining to you because you had given the impression that people who received gifts within the threshold of 20,000 Ghana cedis, there's no indication of whether they relinquish it. And I say in that same document, you are expected to relinquish that gift upon exit of, office, unless you have received express permission by the president to keep that particular gift. Let me also explain. You were asking about the rationale behind the threshold. I also want to invite us to have a conversation around beyond campaign financing, beyond political party financing. We should have a conversation around governance financing. I say this because even my colleague that you asked, your name just escaped me right now, the MP for
That's Hassan
Ikoyi,
Tampuli.
and Mr. Tampuli. You asked him because he's been in government before, and let me tell you that 20,000 cedis in the hands of a minister for a day is like pittance in comparison to the amounts of pressures and demands and requests that come to them. So we must also, I'm happy Kojo is there, we must have a broader conversation about governance financing and these pressures that make some of these things. That 20,000, you can be assured that even if a minister receives 20,000 cedis as a gift, that 20,000 will go to solve the problems of 100, 20, 300 people asking for 10 cities or 100 Ghana
Yeah, but I
cities
mean,
or 50 Ghana cities.
but why should
Right.
that? But why should that be any? Why should anybody's concern? The minister decides if he wants to spend his private resources
It must be your concern
on
because we have
giving
opted.
freebies to
It
people.
must be, and we must not discount this because it is acting like the proverbial ostrich who sees nothing, hears nothing, that creates the deterioration of our democracy. We have all consistently argued that this democracy that we are operating in its current state is not sustainable. It's not sustainable because the cost of running it is colossal.
Yeah, but whose
It's
fault is it?
colossal for government. it is, you see, are you looking for fault finding this evening,
No,
or
I
you
mean,
are interested in
in
having
terms of
conversations
solutions,
about
in terms
how,
of in terms of solutions,
so don't start.
the
Evans, you
political
don't start.
appointees themselves,
You don't
the
start on the
MPs,
point of whose
when they
fault it
campaign,
is.
they create the expectation, and then when they get into office, they complain that the demands are too high, but they go and make all the
No,
promises.
nobody
But
is creating an
that I
expectation,
want to, if you
and
don't mind,
nobody is complaining about demands. I'm saying that the reality of the context we operate is what it is, and we have to find a way around it and ensure that we really restore our democracy and have fair and just conversations about how to improve the system.
I want to
Coming
get.
back to, yes.
Yeah, I want to get clarity on another exception under the gift, very briefly under the gift, so we can move on to other big things in the code. The gifts clause also talks about, first of all, it says you can't accept a gift. To avoid the creation or appearance of an obligation, gifts in cash or kind are not to be solicited or accepted. And then right after that, it says, an exception to this rule is the acceptance of a gift presented during an official visit to an institution. Can we get clarity on that? Or what does that mean exactly? That if you visit a Joy FM with an institution, and
Can you
we give
explain
you
that again? Sorry, you
no,
were
it
reading
says,
from which portion?
and this is still under the gifts, page 28. That is the first opening clause. The opening clause, that's 1.5
Yes.
point 12.
So 1, 2.
Yes. It says to avoid the creation and appearance of an obligation, gifts in cash or kind are not to be solicited or accepted from commercial enterprises or any other organizations. Then it says, an exception to this rule is the acceptance of a gift presented during an official visit to an institution. Does that suggest that once a public officer visits an institution and is given a gift, he's allowed to accept that gift? I mean, can you explain why this exception
On
was
the
created?
case of it, it is so. You also should accept that we do operate in a cultural context. In fact, it is not just an African cultural context, it is a global cultural context. In the systems that you reference to in other jurisdictions, they have a gifts registry where they, they register all gifts that come to that particular office. Official ceremonies are official ceremonies, and sometimes there are protocols around it. So recently, we had the Czech president visit us. They presented the government of Ghana with some gifts, and we also did the same. We went to Ouagadougou. They gave us a gift. We also gave them a gift. So there are protocol arrangements globally around gifts given and gifts exchange. And so if it's an official ceremony and you've been giving a gift, why should you decline it? There's a cultural context to it. So once that gift is registered in your institution's registry and you abide by the guidelines within the code, you wouldn't have committed any breach of the code.
Okay, and Dr. Kojo Asante, quick comment on that. That is culturally acceptable, is it not? That exception that has been created.
Yeah, but that's why there is a threshold even for gifts generally. So yes, people exchange gifts all the time, institutions, dignitaries, and so on. But there's also a threshold, and there's also a process for disclosing such gifts, how those gifts are dealt with, and so on and so forth. Actually, if you go to Strategies 2006 guidelines on conflict of interest, there's all even about how you dispose of gifts and all of those things. So the issue, as I said, for me is how do you avoid generating an incentive for a conflict a conflict of interest situation to generate? And so Shabima is right that we have to always look at our context, the issue about what happens in governance, but it all arises, the starting point is campaign financing and the kinds of pressures and so on that happens when you come in government and people's efforts to try to recoup investments that they have made, payments that they have made, the demands on them and all of that. But you see, if we do not find a way to begin to reverse some of these processes it's going to be very, very difficult, as Shamima is saying, for us to sustain what is going on. So for me, it's a very important starting point, even on the asset declaration. The fact that we are now really enforcing asset declaration in a way that we can also impose sanctions. But as Mr. Domolovo has said, the ultimate aim is to codify public ethics. But I am happy that we have started this now. The president has put his political capital on the line around these issues, around resetting, and we will hold him accountable. What we have to do is to make sure that the obligations are clear. We can all track it. We can see violations. So, for example, I don't see which institution is responsible for overseeing this process.
Yeah, and that is an important point. It
where
appears,
do I go?
If you read the entire document, there are two, I guess, individuals who are the masters of this: the president himself and the chief of staff. Isn't that adequate?
I don't want to assume. There has to be a clear mechanism for reporting and accountability, so that, because this is the president has published it, he will have people monitoring it. But we as citizens also have to have a place to go where we see violations so that the president can take action. The other thing is that I also want to see what is the standards that the president is also setting, because this is a code of conduct for ministers. But what is the standard for the president? And how can we hold him accountable as well? So I am looking for certain things. We'll take our time to also sort of, put our comments on where we think that this code of conduct, can be refined and be more clearer. But I think ultimately it's really codifying all the issues that have been raised around public ethics.
I mean, Daniel Domolovo, I know. Sorry, forgive me. I'll come to you pretty shortly, Samima. I know Daniel Domolovo has an intervention. Yes, Mr. Domolovo.
Yes, thank you very much, and good evening to my sister Shamima. I can share in the defense she's putting up, but let's remember always that Ghana is not the only country on this earth, and there are international practices. It gets to me when people start arguing that our culture is gift giving is part of our culture. Which culture prohibits gift giving? It is global. So let's not pretend that it's only Ghanaians who are good at gift giving. Of course, I agree that giving gift is part of human nature, but it has the potential of corrupting anybody. And she made a statement which I found very intriguing, when he said 20,000 is a peanut in the hands of a political officer who will go out sharing. Is that part of the job of a public office holder? You have to go around and be distributing money among people. Then in that case, use your personal money. Sorry for crying aloud. So please, Shamima, I agree with you that we have been encouraging some of these misbehaviors from my point of view for a very long time. Let us reset the country, not using standards which are not acceptable. Let's look for standards that meet international acceptance. A minister has no job distributing money to people. Before you say 20,000 is a peanut. Well, I don't know, but when I was in office as Auditor General, you will not even get $1 or a CD from me, because that is not of my jobs. I'm not there to give money to people. So please, let's try and jojo and make sure that the move that we make going forward adds value, instead of looking at benchmarking, what I call negative benchmarking. We look at bad standards and then we compare ourselves to it and start clapping for ourselves that we are performing. So that's what I want to plead, that let's keep an open mind and look for what is good and what is sustainable, what can work for us, not the bad practices of office holders. Thank you.
Shamima?
Yes. Well, let me make some quick clarifications regarding. Let me start with what Mr. Domlevo has just said about the threshold. The point of the argument was to draw our attention to the fact of resources in the hands of public office holders. No MP goes around distributing money. No minister goes around distributing money, there is a germane issue of public office holders expected to use the position of power and influence and resources to be a redistributive mechanism to solving and alleviating the challenges people face. That is a reality many people face. And if we want to fight corruption, we must fight the various manifestations that lead to some of these expressions. And it is in no way a justification. It is inviting us to understand the reality of governance beyond political party organizing, beyond political party campaigns to governance. And that's why I invited us to begin to have conversations around, governance financing. How does a government, other than solving the mass problems, the social problems, also solve? You go to a minister's office or you go to an MP's office, and there are several people, Ghanaians, who are appealing for financial help to deal with health problems, to deal with school fees problems. These are problems of citizens, and leaders must solve problems of citizens. So it was not in justification of the threshold, but to point direction to the fact that even 20,000 Ghana cedis as a gift in the hands of a public officer or a public office holder will not scratch the surface. So that, because we're talking about the value of the gift, and I was trying to make the connection that the value of 20,000 Ghana cedis in the hand of a politician who expends more than that on a daily basis, and the honorable MP on this call is well aware of that.
Yeah.
I am not an MP, I'm not a
Hold on.
minister,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I am
I'll come
well
to it,
aware
Tampoli.
of these challenges. So
Yeah.
let me just say that it is a very good first step in His Excellency's John Dramani Mohammed's government to really open up and be more transparent. And to Kojo, your point about giving access to citizens, the president in his speech did announce that there's going to be a public platform where the public is equally invited to anonymously present onto that, platform evidence of public office holders who may have breached any aspects of
the code.
the code of conduct. And we are still listening. And we are a listening government.
And in furtherance of
if there
that,
are
I noticed that you've published it now and it's accessible for the public.
Yes, it is
to-
accessible so that you know what you can report on, and then the platform would be set up and
Yeah.
you can access it and report
Shamima, stay
so
with
that
me.
we are all part of it.
Stay with me. Let me bring in Tampoli. Tampoli, yes?
Evans, listening to my sister Shamima, sense of deja vu. I feel like if this conversation was had about 6 months ago, I'm not too sure Shamima will say the things that she's saying right now. Because,
Like,
like, for instance, the pressures on the MPs and then the public officers and so on and so forth. I'm sure Shamima would have been joining a demonstration, to call out the
it is
public officers who
false.
sit
Then
in
you
this.
haven't followed
But
my
it seems
conversations and
this,
my advocacies.
Evans,
Your narrative
Yeah.
is false.
so what it is that even what she's saying is that 20,000 cities is pittance. Now, I have cited a draft handbook for ministers,
From
2008,
what was the source of
and
this?
there is a clause.
What was the source of
And
this?
I can share it with you. A draft is handbook for ministers, 2008, and there is a section 1.4.5 on gifts, and the threshold. And if you permit me, I'll just read. If ministers wish to retain gifts received in Ghana or overseas, they may do so if the estimated value is not more than 200 Ghana cedis. If the estimated value is 200 Ghana cedis or more, the gift may be retained while in office, but must be declared on the individual's interests. Gifts with an estimated value of over 500 Ghana cedis must be relinquished on leaving office unless the expert permission of the president to retain them is obtained.
Did you say 2008? Is that
2008.
That is Kufuor.
I'll share it with you.
So that is the Kufuor administration? No, just a second.
Say that again?
Is that the Kufuor administration's code?
That is correct. That is Kufuor administration.
Okay, so to just put it in context, 200 CD at the time would have been $100, because at the time it was one CD to 200.
At that time, the dollar was almost at par with the city.
Yes.
That is the period that we did the
renodulation, yes. But your substantive point is
$200 or $500.
Yeah, your substantive point.
There is some basis for comparison. But I think the 20,000 cities, and like I said before, I think 20,000 cities, if we are to solve a problem and not to look at what the minister or the MP will be spending on his constituents or people who come soliciting for funds, they will not be solving the problem. I think that we are dealing with the situation.
Yeah, I mean,
if we are dealing with the situation, we should not use cultural practices and customary processes and so on and so forth. I mean,
Mr. Tampoli, since I have you,
a uniform customary practice in the country anyway.
I mean, since I have you on, very quickly, Mr. Since I have you on, there's another clause in this that I'm interested in, and I want to put it to you. It has actually imported the clause in the Constitution about whether public officers can hold any office of profit, and it says clearly that ministers are not to engage in any private business, trade, or commercial activity that has the potential to divert his or her focus from his or her official duties. But here's the thing. Many of the ministers, even the MPs, have private businesses that sustain them. I mean, is this even realistic?
Evans, under the Constitution, a minister of state or member of parliament or deputy minister who wants to engage in private business has to secure the certificates from the speaker. So there's a committee in parliament, committee on emoluments. You write to the committee, you write to the speaker, it's referred to the committee, they evaluate your requests, and on the basis of the evaluation, they can grant you or not grant you. You understand?
Yeah.
So basically, you need to get the certificate of the speaker before you be able to do. I know, for instance, a minister of state right now who is an astute farmer. Of course, I found with him in the same enclave. I'm not too sure the minister will say, because I'm a minister now, I'm no longer
going to engage in that. I mean,
you understand?
And you raise a very important point, but because
the process.
Under this code, it does not create that exception where you can actually run a private business for profit and get a permission to do so. It doesn't state that at all. And so
because it is so, because the Constitution has clearly
stated it. Okay.
And the Constitution supersedes any other
thing, including the code.
Document that comes in. So it's moot. As far as I'm concerned, that matter has been dealt with very well
in the Constitution. And just before we wrap up, Dana Demelebo, I want to just circle back to the asset declaration question. We know that tomorrow, the final deadline would have kicked in. Close of day 48 hours the president gave to those who did not first comply with his directive would have to declare or to lose their jobs. But a quick question. They are losing already 4 months' salary. Now, isn't that in itself creating an avenue for corruption? Because how is a minister who is assumed to be depending on his salary, right? How does he survive 4 months without salary and expect that he still does his job and go about it? How does he survive? Doesn't that create an avenue for corruption?
No, I don't agree with that position. He must go to the bank and borrow money so that when his salary starts coming, he uses it to defray the loan that he has taken. Why do we assume that just because you didn't earn any salary, you must be doing corruption? Some of us, we are not in office. We have not been receiving salaries. I think the Honorable Deputy Minister is no more receiving salaries. So does that mean he is involved in corruption before he can survive? I don't agree or don't subscribe to that. Let him or her go and borrow money. Then she will be defraying it on monthly basis when the salary start flowing. But let me be honest with you. I praise the president for punishing people who have defaulted for the first time. This has never happened. And I am praying that 1 or 2 will default by tomorrow so that they fire the person and then it will be deterrence to public office holders.
I mean, Shamim, I need to ask you.
Evans, just a quick one.
Yes.
A quick one.
Yeah.
Does the Constitution provide the remedy that the president is applying right now? The Constitution is very clear. The Constitution has given you a certain period within which to do the declaration. If you haven't done so, it is self-fulfilling.
You
I mean,
lose your job. The
there's
Constitution is very clear. You lose your job. Yeah.
easily. So I'm not too sure whether the president has the powers to grant exception and then extension to appointees who have not met, the timelines that have been provided under the
I mean,
bill. I'm not
Tampoli,
too sure
is it?
Evans, let me come in there.
Yes, Daniel.
Evans,
Yes, Daniel.
please allow me to come in there.
Yeah.
It is true the Constitution, if you go according to Article 286, it says declare before, so it's prior to taking office.
Yeah.
No government has ever done that, and none of the administrations since 1993 do that. However, in 1998, they passed this Public Office Holders Asset Declaration and Qualification Act at 550. At 550 allows a 6 months window that you should do that, but you should not wait beyond 6 months. So every government has become comfortable with using the 6 months. The president has reduced it using his initiative. I don't think there is anything wrong with that. What Honorable is saying, he's talking about law, but it is equally unlawful for people to disobey lawful instructions, unless we say that the president cannot ask his appointees to obey the Constitution. In fact, if we are going to go straightly according to the Constitution, then they have all defaulted. They should have even declared before assuming office. Now, there is another law in the country which is still in our statutes. It has not been repealed. So people can say, well, another law allows me to do that, and that law says 6 months. The president, in his wisdom, tells you the condition for accepting appointment from me is that you declare by this date, and you didn't obey. I think that is a lawful instruction for which the sanctions that he has prescribed, I think they are good.
Okay.
From my point.
So I have a proposal.
Yeah, okay.
I have a proposal.
Okay, yeah. Very briefly, Tampoli, so I can hear Shamim before I wrap up.
In giving out appointment letters, I think the president can also give out, letters of termination undated. So you get the person to sign. In the event that you don't do it, I'll just date it and then release a letter.
Okay.
How about that?
Fascinating one there. Shamima, very quickly. I mean, tomorrow by close of day.
I'm very happy that.
Yeah. But Shamima, whilst you answer that last point, I mean, I just need to wrap up in a minute. But also attack this for me. In the interest of transparency, since the president had actually now set the tone for this, will your government publish for all of us to know which of the appointees have fulfilled this declaration and met the deadline 48 hours by close of day, so we don't have to go and file an RTI?
I don't have information on that. You can still go and file an RTI if you so want that information. What I am happy about is that a new chapter in our democratic journey has been opened. And I'm happy to invite the Honorable MP Tampoli to come on board this train and to see how leaders can use their power and commit that power to actually begin to act on matters that have been on the drawing table for long. And so I'm very happy that across the nation, the majority view has hailed this decision of His Excellency, not only to publish and communicate strongly in no uncertain terms his commitment to ensure an alignment on the side of his appointees, but also to grant the people of Ghana a new feel to governance, a new character of governance, a character that will be evolved around the individual and collective conduct of members of this administration. Again, let me reiterate, because at the risk of being misrepresented, nobody is making a justification to say that because of the expenses of MPs and appointees, the threshold for gifts. Remember, the gifts may not necessarily be cash gifts. I am creating a connection to the value, and the value question is so that the value of the gift does not become an influencing mechanism. And I'm saying that one would have to do more to influence a public office holder, like a minister or an MP or a staffer. One would have to do more to give them a value of a gift in the estimation of 20,000 Ghana cedis, given the extent of expenditure, or the amount
Okay.
of expenditure they engage in.
Okay.
That is the value question I was addressing.
Shamima,
Again, to
I'm grateful.
reiterate that I didn't say
I'm
and didn't
curious if
communicate. I
I'm
didn't
grateful.
communicate.
I'm grateful, Shamima. I'm grateful, all of you, Donald Melavo, Dr. Kojo Asante, and Tampuli for joining me. This is a conversation that has started, and we will monitor this. Well, close update tomorrow, we'll get to know which MP, minister, and that the government had failed to comply with the president's directive, and we'll be reporting back to you here on Journalists. Enjoy the rest of your evening.